Well, listening to that rendition kind of brings us back, doesn't it? For some of us anyway. And for those of us who don't know what I'm talking about, you're reliving it again. Because we're in that time now. We're in the time where we have to worry about what's in the wind, whether or not we can overcome the difficulties of this time. I spent the early part of this morning writing a pastoral letter to you all, which you'll get tomorrow, because I've been thinking a great deal about the difficulties we're facing. It almost seems like we are in a whirlpool that's going down and down and down. We watch as legislators are assassinated for their political beliefs. Judges are arrested. Judges that give verdicts that are contrary to the administration are finding themselves challenged, and then even when that original judgment is supported, the administration doesn't always follow it. And then yesterday there's this parade, which I'm told you could only hear the squeaky wheels and the treads of the tanks as they rolled down the streets in Washington, D.C. And now Iran and Israel are firing missiles at each other. There's a lot to be anxious about, isn't there? Yeah. There's a lot to be worried about. But here's the thing, friends. Some of you, and many more who aren't in this room, were in the streets yesterday. So while all you could hear on Constitution Avenue was squeaky treads on rusty old tanks, what you heard across America was over 8 million people in the streets. Can I hear an amen to that? Amen. Hey. We were out there, and the best part about it was joyful, despite the litany I just read you. It was joyful. People were out singing and dancing because we know this, don't we? We know that it takes joy to undo evil. It takes persistence to undo what is wrong in this world. And it takes the perseverance of time, as we just heard from Dylan, for us to know that the answer is not just in the wind, but in our hearts. I've had all this on my mind as I've been thinking about what I wanted to say today about Father's Day. And I was thinking about the anxiety that many of us are feeling deep down in our hearts and our souls. Many of us who really were hoping that the world would go in another direction. But those missed opportunities are always there. And that's why we're still here. And just as mothers and fathers and all those who have cared for other people know, it takes the going over it again and again and again in order to have a better world, whether it's for our families, our communities, our country, or our world. The campaign to celebrate the nation's fathers did not meet with enthusiasm when it was first proposed. One florist explained when they first tried to pass Father's Day back in the 60s, fathers don't have the same sentimental appeal that mothers have. But all the way back on July 5th, 1908, a West Virginia church sponsored a nation's event in honor of fathers. It was a Sunday memorial to the 362 men who had died in the previous December's explosion in the Fairmount Coal Company mines. The next year, in 1909, a Spokane, Washington woman, one of 6 children raised by a widower, tried to establish the equivalent to Mother's Day for male parents. And so she went to the local churches and the YMCA and to shopkeepers and to government officials in Washington state trying to drum up support for this idea. And she was successful. And Washington state was the first to celebrate Father's Day, July 19th, 1910. During the 1920s and the 30s, a movement arose to scrap both Mother's Day and Father's Day and just have a Parents' Day. And this is getting ridiculous, they would say. Let's just have a single day. But paradoxically, it was the Depression that derailed the effort to combine and decommercialize the holiday, because struggling retailers and advertisers redoubled their efforts for a Father's Day, which would be a second Christmas for men, promoting things such as neckties, which, by the way, is where that comes from. That was the original promotion, was neckties. You'll notice I'm now wearing one. I have many neckties, but I'm wearing this pin that one of my daughters gave me instead. They realized that people would buy things for their fathers, maybe not at the same sentimental rate as they buy them for their mothers, but when World War II began, advertisers began to argue that Father's Day was a way to honor the American troops and support the war effort. But it wasn't until 1972, in the middle of a hard-won or hard-fought presidential re-election campaign, which we would later learn was marred by Watergate, Richard Nixon proclaimed Father's Day a federal holiday. How about that? Who knew? Today, economists estimate that Americans spend $1.3 billion on Father's Day gifts. However, many men, including my own father, have disapproved of the day. As one wag wrote, "I scoff at the holiday's sentimental attempts to domesticate manliness with flowers and gift-giving. I deride the proliferation of the holiday as a commercial gimmick to sell more products, often paid for by the father himself." Amen. Fatherhood is, well, it's complicated, right? Like mothers, we all have our understandings and our baggage and all the things that surround fatherhood and the extension, and by the way, of patriarchy in general. I recognize that some of us have been hurt by our fathers. Some of us would like to distance ourselves from our fathers. Some never really knew their fathers. I recognize that fatherhood is deeply connected to patriarchy, expressed in relationships and discrimination, in homophobia, and now, sadly, at least with our president, in a national character. Fatherhood is flawed, and it's also celebrated because there are many fathers, far more fathers, who have loved and kept us and nurtured us. And like any relationship that aspires to be centered on love, we, I think, still have an obligation to free our fathers, or the images of fathers, from all of that which is negative. And whether it's a holiday or not, I applaud a day to celebrate dads and all those who have stood in that role, maybe because we still have something to learn from our fathers. In her book, Father Time, the social anthropologist Sari Hurdy found that primate males care for newborns less than 5% of the time on average. But then she said, in an unexpected finding, is that inside every man there lurks ancient caretaking tendencies which are embedded in our DNA that render a man every bit as protective and nurturing as the most committed mother. That in fact, what we know now is that men that spend more time around babies and families have lower testosterone and more empathy towards other people. Indeed, the fact of the matter is that right now, in the middle of this patriarchal nationalism, over 20% of American men are full-time caregivers for their children. 1 in 5. That's a remarkable number. Only 20 years ago, that was 8%. Could this be that we're somehow freeing fatherhood from the prison of patriarchy and are possibly leading something of a new age, that we defeat the specter of imperialism that we seem to be falling into? Could this be a fundamental embrace of our supreme value of love between any parent, regardless of gender, towards children who are inheriting this blossoming mess of a world? Because here's what I see. And yesterday was a good example. You can have the patriarchal and stern fatherhood of a Trump and a parade of squeaky tanks, or you can have over 8 million people on the street singing and banging drums. I'm going to go with the singing and banging drums of fatherhood over the squeaky tanks. My own father, Ward Morehouse, died on June 30th, 2012, 13 years ago. I was not there when he died. He was swimming in his favorite pond in Massachusetts, where he suffered a massive heart attack. The paramedics revived his heart, but he was in a coma and he died 12 hours later. I was with Francis and I think one of our kids, and we were driving through Yellowstone National Park on the day that he died. There was no cell reception. While driving through the park, I had this incredible urge to jump into the glacier lake. Now, I don't know how many of you actually been to Yellowstone. There's a beautiful lake in the middle of it, and it comes from a glacier, so it's cold. It's really cold. I knew that. But for some reason, I had this urge, and I said, Francis, she was driving, I pull over the car, I've got to jump in the lake. And she pulls over the car, and I strip down to my skivvies, and I dive into that lake, and I come up, I can barely breathe. And I get out, and I dry myself off, and we're driving down the road, and she says, that was an odd decision. Yeah, I said, seems like it was. Very odd. And as we're coming out of the park down the east side of the Rockies, we pick up a cell reception, and my brother has been trying to get a hold of us, and I call him, and he says, Dad died. And it would take me a while to realize that the moment I jumped in the lake was the moment he had the heart attack. My father is a complex man. Like many of his generation, he was emotionally distant, which is not to say he didn't feel. I think he did, but almost all of it was on the inside. He preferred a stoic response, as he would often call it, to life. And there was good reason for this, I think, in some ways. He was a child of the Great Depression. His father was often absent, a wayward academic. And his mother, my grandmother, suffered from debilitating depression. She was often institutionalized. My father learned on early that emotions were best kept to himself. And I'm not like my dad in that way, I don't think. I express myself more openly, sometimes a little too openly to all of you, as my beloved Francis will tell me. You said what? But here's the thing. Don't we always try to be a little better? Try to do something more? And I have to say that my 5 daughters have had a lot to becoming who I am today. I'll admit to not being as present to my children growing up as I thought I was. And I can go ahead and excuse that by saying I was trying to hold down more than one job early in my career. I don't know how I managed this, but I was full-time at one church and half-time at another. I was doing so many weddings, 4 or 5 a weekend. I was, in that way, my father's son, and I too needed freeing. And yet, despite the flaws, my father gave me wisdom. Wisdom seen and unseen, virtues that I think could free any of us, honesty and optimism and loyalty and hard work and vision. And so today, in honor of my father and all fathers, biological and those who have worn the mantle otherwise, I offer some lessons to help us free our fathers and ourselves. I think, first of all, we are freed by honesty. When I was 7 years old, my best friend Tommy Walzak and I broke into a neighbor's house. I don't know why we did it, just thought it was something cool to do. I remember making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We thought we covered our tracks, but something about the breadcrumbs on the counter and the jelly on the knife in the sink and the torn screen told the people who lived there otherwise. Our neighbors, Julius and Lillian Kahn, who, by the way, founded Coach Leather long before it became what it is today, they figured out it had to be me. So they went to my dad, and I talked to him in his study, which was this wondrous basement room full of canyons of paper, and he said, "Did you do that?" And I thought about lying for just a second, and I said, he knows that I know that he knows, and I was like, nah. I did tell him that I did that, and he said, well, we're going to make amends for that. And you're going to work off the repair of the screen, and then you're going to apologize to the Kahns. And that was all very scary to me at, 11, 12, I don't know how old I was. And I went next door and I apologized, and the Kahns were trying to be so serious. And they accepted my apology, and Julius said, before he died, Julius Kahn said, yeah, Lily and I had to try not to laugh while you were doing that. It was so cute. My father taught me that you make mistakes, and the best way to overcome those mistakes is to admit them and then to try to do better. Mark Twain once quipped that you need to tell the truth and then you don't have to remember anything. Wisdom in that. My father freed me in another way, in that he's most of the time was more optimistic than pessimistic. I'm prone to fatalism sometimes, not unlike my mother, who lived by the proposition that if something bad happens, if you're thinking something bad's going to happen, then you won't be surprised, and if something good happens, you'll be pleasantly surprised. And I thought, well, But my father always believed the world could be better than what it was. Of course, that's before the mess we're in, right? More often than not, he thought of himself as Don Quixote, tilting at windmills. That's what he would say. It was a quaint reference to a man who dedicated most of his life to challenging the abuses of corporations. On accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the people of Bhopal in 1994 for his efforts to bring Union Carbide to justice for gassing thousands of people in their industrial accident, he spoke of a new day unfolding where people would come before prophets. And that's a long way from where we are now. But I inherited this dream of a better world, and I've tried to spend my career building communities on a smaller scale. This is the fifth church that Francis and I have served, and I have to say, this one has the most comprehensive and most serious vision of what we could be. We best free fatherhood by being loyal to the ones we love, and this is something I also learned. In fact, I think those who know me might call me loyal to a fault. I remember a story my father told that in 1972, another important year, Richard Nixon was just opening up relations with Red China, and a scholar by the name of Jack Chen, who had written a scathing indictment of the Communist Party, had applied for political asylum in the United States. And my father knew Dr. Chen from some work that he had been doing at the Asia Society. And he offered him a job as a consultant for the New York State Department of Education. My father was director of international programs. And you needed a job to get asylum. He brought Dr. Chen over, and despite intense pressure from the chancellor to fire Dr. Chen, my father held his ground, and he was accused of harboring a communist. He was called a communist. There are FBI files somewhere in the National Archives that talk about my father as a communist. But he stood his ground, and Dr. Chen was able to keep his position, but my father realized he could no longer work inside that sort of an institution, and he devoted the rest of his life to writing books and publishing books on social change. I am loyal in that way. I stay by the churches I have agreed to serve, In 36 years, I've only taken 1 month of sabbatical. But then I get this wonderful summer vacation, so I consider that a sabbatical. And here's the thing. What I've realized is that if you're loyal to the congregation you serve, the congregation will be loyal to you, and most of all, will be loyal together to the vision that we have. And we'll be bound together in that beautiful idea of covenant, that old understanding of what it means to be part of a people together, the mutual promise that Victoria Safford said is like a living, breathing aspiration which is made new every day. It's not enforced by consequences. It's reinforced by forgiveness and grace. Whenever we stumble, whenever we forget, whenever we mess up. And I think fatherhood's like that too. Freeing fathers has always meant hard work, and that's something that my dad did teach me. He had a hand in building every house he ever lived in. He built some part of it. This was his Thoreauian ideal of self-reliance, but I tried to learn how to be a builder. I'm not a builder. Francis is a much better builder than I am. I'm a good go-getter. I can go get things most of the time. But I am a hard worker, and I'm a hard worker in part because my father taught me that. I try not to let work define the relationships with the ones I love. That's been a little harder for me than I thought it would be. Fatherhood, I really should be about play as much as it should be about kids. Like the story that I was reading to the kids, it's not really about giving up on fun. It's that you change the focus of your fun. I've long believed, Francis and I have long believed, that there's really no such thing as quality time. There's just time. And the more time you spend with someone, the more you'll be able to understand who they are. And with your kids, you're able to open yourself up to new feelings. What Antonio Damasio, the great neurologist, once said, we register experiences from moment to moment, and the more moments you spend with someone, the more experiences you register. That in our bodies, our emotions, we pick up on music and the feeling of what happens. And when we fail to record those signals in our minds and our thoughts, we become divorced from those experiences, and we readily fall under the sway of false authority. That should sound familiar. And this last line from his book, the grounds for love and for democracy could slip away from under our feet if we don't remember that they're all rooted in love. What my father failed to do, and I'm trying to do better, is care for the ones I love in a more direct sense. And the most important thing that I think has happened in the last 10 years in research on this is that we now know there's nothing necessarily innate in caring for children. Mothers have an advantage at the very beginning, but the fact of the matter is that the more caretakers there are in a child's life, the better that life will be, that in fact 2 is not enough. Research anthropologically and biologically shows that 3 or more what they call all-parenting parent roles will make a child's life better. It truly takes a village, and that's why coming here with your kids is so important, because you're exposed to all these other parental types who don't care what your grades are, who don't care how you dress, they just care that you're here and that you're loved. Carol Gilligan, in her beautiful book, Joining the Resistance, says, all parenting, and the engagement of others, whether they're biological or not, actually helps a child survive better in the world. Babies who are better at gauging intentions of others engage with them by seeing more people who want to understand who they are, and that helps them elicit care in their own life. And what has happened over time is that evolution has selected those qualities that facilitate mutual understanding. We know that children raised without any kind of love or human touch die young. And we know that kids who are raised with empathy and cooperation will live long and fruitful lives, even if their circumstances in every other way are negative. I think we can free fatherhood by being a little more flexible. I will say this for my dad, he was always late for every train and plane that he ever took. And his motto was, there's always another plane, which is mostly true. And he had a very hard time adjusting to the post-9/11 world with this theater of the absurd we call the TSA. He didn't like that. He liked to be able to slide in just as they're closing the door. My mother, on the other hand, and I'm much more like her in this regard, wanted us to be at the airport the day before we had to leave. But we learn to balance one another when we are in relationships. I've been known to change my mind quite a bit about the congregations I serve. We're going to go this way. No, wait a minute. We're going to go this way, then this way. And then somewhere along the line, I got accused of, being flip-flopping. And it's like, you know what? We're just navigating. That's all we're doing. We're navigating. That's what leadership is. It navigates. And finally, friends, freedom comes when we hold up a vision and we move towards it. And I want to bring us full circle to where we are right now. We sing with gusto here. We sing with love and compassion in our hearts because we know that the world is in a bad way. And we sing it, as I said last week, not as an escape, but as something that we can hold in our hearts, as a vision of what could still be. And that's the vision that I have for all of you, that we will be the beacon of joy, that people will come through these doors and find sustenance for the days ahead, but that equally so we will be out in the streets when we need to be, because we will have to be out many, many more times. And even if you've come here broken and you need only to come here and be sustained and no other energy exists for you to do anything else in the world, that's fine too. All of that's okay. Because we have a vision that joy is an act of resistance and the world can be a better place and we have a part in it. Can I get an amen on that? Amen. We're in the midst of a powerful transition in our society. And it's not just a slipping back into some feudalism. This could be a slipping back before we catapult our way forward. And I don't think it's going to happen in some nice, neat package. All kumbaya. It's going to be a give and a take and a give and more take, and then there's some more give, and finally I think we will break through. This is the transition. Every 1,000 years in Western culture, there has been a transition of this magnitude, and we're in it right now. You look at the Middle Ages, you look at the turn of the 20th century, you look at the turn of the 21st century, and here we are. And all the things that are working against us, all the misinformation and the screens and the memes and all of that, that of course is real, but that's not the whole story, because at the end of the day, it's what happened yesterday. It's what happened in the streets when people just come together body to body and they're singing. And we're holding up a vision of what could be. The poet John Donne once wrote that no spring nor summer beauty hath such grace as I have seen in one autumn's face. We're feeling the autumn, but I believe there's a spring coming. I am reminded today that people went through so much worse in the Great Depression, so much worse in the world wars, so much worse in other parts of this world, and we here have been given this love, this mandate, this mantle of caring to change the world. My father's memorial service, we sang "Rank by Rank Again We Stand." And if I had had a chance to talk to David before he left for New Zealand, he's in New Zealand on vacation, David Brown is our music director, I would have said, let's sing this song, but I don't know this till I write it on a Thursday, and he has to make these choices 2 weeks ahead of time, so that's fine. It's a processional. It's made for people to come in. It's usually sung in ordinations and installations of minister. People all dressed up in the regalia. My father's verse was towards the end. He loved this verse. He said, "Honored days and names we reckon, days of comrades gone before, lives that speak and deeds that beckon. Though the path be hard and long, still we strive in expectation. What they dream be ours to do, hope their hopes and seal them true." We are on that road, my friends. And this is a day to remind ourselves that we have our fathers and our mothers and all those who've cared at our backs. Let's get marching. Amen.